In the shadow of the frost-kissed pines, where the moon wept silver tears upon the unbroken snow, a single loaf of bread became the fragile bridge between despair and unspoken fate. Mireya's breath hung in the air like a ghost, fragile and fleeting against the relentless bite of the northern wind. The forest of eldridge sprawled around her, a labyrinth of ancient evergreens bowed under the weight of winter's indifference, their branches clawing at the starless sky. She had been wandering these trails for days, weeks perhaps, since the pack's verdict echoed through the hollows of her mind. Unworthy, tainted, cast out. The Omega's mark on her skin, a faint crescent scar at the base of her throat, burned not from silver chains, but from the deeper wound of rejection. Her Alpha, once a shadow of promise in her youth, had chosen a stronger mate, one whose lineage promised alliances and power. Mireya was surplus, a whisper of scent too soft for the pack's roaring ambitions. They had left her at the border with nothing but the clothes on her back and a warning: cross the river, and do not return. Hunger gnawed at her insides, sharper than the cold that seeped through her threadbare cloak. The loaf in her satchel was her last, baked from scavenged roots and a pinch of stolen flour, its crust hardened by the chill. She clutched it close, her fingers numb and blue-veined, as if it were the last ember of her dignity. The moon, that eternal witness, hung low and bloated, casting a pallid glow over the snowdrifts that swallowed her footprints whole. Uivos distantes ecoavam das montanhas, lamentos de lobos famintos ou espíritos inquietos. Ela não sabia mais. The world felt vast and indifferent, a canvas of white gélido streaked with the crimson memory of her bloodied palms from thorns she had pushed through. She paused at the edge of a frozen stream, its surface a mirror cracked by the wind's fury. Kneeling, Mireya cupped snow in her hands, letting it melt against her lips, tasteless sustenance for a body that trembled on the brink. Her mind wandered to the old tales whispered in the pack's fireside gatherings, the goddesses chosen, Omegas who bore hidden paths in their veins, guiding the lost through tempests of fate. But those were stories for the unbroken, not for her, who had been deemed too frail to even mend wounds or foresee storms. What strength was there in mercy when survival demanded claws? She pressed the scar at her throat, feeling the pulse beneath, a faint rhythm that mocked her isolation. The wind howled again, carrying the scent of smoke, distant, perhaps a hunter's fire, or the illusion of warmth her delirium conjured. Pushing onward, her boots crunched through the crust of ice, each step a defiance against the pull of surrender. The trees thinned, revealing a narrow ravine where boulders loomed like silent sentinels, their surfaces etched with rime. There, slumped against a jagged outcrop, was a figure she had not expected. A man, cloaked in ragged furs that spoke of hard travel, his broad frame bowed as if the weight of the world pressed upon his shoulders. His face was half hidden by a hood, shadowed and gaunt, with stubble darkening a jaw set in quiet endurance. He did not stir as she approached, but his scent hit her first, a storm of pine and iron laced with the metallic tang of blood and something deeper, like the earth after rain, Alpha, undeniably, yet muted, as if veiled by will alone. Mireya froze, her instincts warring between flight and the pull of compassion that had always been her curse. He was no pack member. His aura carried the solitude of an exile, much like her own. His eyes, when they lifted, were a storm gray, rimmed with exhaustion, and they fixed on her not with hunger's predation, but a weary vigilance. Blood stained the snow at his side, seeping from a gash beneath his cloak. Shallow, perhaps, but enough to weaken even the strongest. She should have run. Omegas did not linger near strangers in these wilds, where betrayal lurked in every shadow. Yet the loaf burned in her grasp, a symbol of the life she refused to let gutter out alone. You're hurt," she murmured, her voice a threadbare whisper swallowed by the wind. She knelt at a cautious distance, the cold biting through her knees. His gaze sharpened, tracing her form, the hollows of her cheeks, the tremor in her hands, but there was no command in it, only a flicker of surprise. "Leave me," he rasped. His tone gravel rough, laced with an accent that hinted at distant courts. The cold claims its own. But Mireia saw the pallor of his skin, the way his breath labored. She had known loss too intimately to turn away. Unfastening her satchel, she broke the loaf in two, the crack echoing like a vow in the silence. The steam from its heart rose faintly, a ghost of warmth. She extended the larger piece toward him, her arm steady despite the ache in her bones. "Take it," she said, meeting his eyes. "Strength is not in enduring alone." He hesitated, his nostrils flaring as her scent enveloped him. Wild heather and fresh snow, pure and unyielding, stirring something primal he had long suppressed. Not lust, but reverence, as if the moon herself had exhaled upon his soul. Valor, king of the ironclad realms, disguised in beggar's rags after fleeing the war council where he had unleashed armies on a whim of pride, felt the bond awaken like a blade unsheathed. He had ordered battles that scarred the land, guilt a shadow he carried like this wound. Yet here, in her offering, was no demand for power, only the quiet grace of survival shared. His fingers brushed hers as he accepted the bread, a spark igniting in the touch, fated, forbidden. Mireia pulled back, unaware of the tremor it sent through him, her heart pounding with the risk she had taken. The wind rose, carrying weavos that seemed to mourn the fragile line they had just crossed under the moon's unblinking gaze. As he ate in silence, the first flakes of a new storm began to fall, veiling the world in white. Mireia wondered if mercy was her Pathfinder's gift, or merely the prelude to greater ruin. The snow fell thicker now, a veil of whispers that muffled the world's sharp edges, turning the ravine into a sanctuary of seclusion. Mireia watched as the stranger devoured the bread, his movements deliberate, almost reverent, as if each bite anchored him against the storm's encroaching fury. The wind tugged at her cloak, carrying the faint, acrid scent of his blood mingling with the earthy warmth of her offering. Bread that had been her tether to tomorrow, now halved between them. She should have felt the loss keenly, a hollow in her belly mirroring the one in her chest. But instead, a strange quietude settled over her, born not of relief, but of the unspoken pact forged in that shared silence. He lowered the remnant from his lips, his storm-gray eyes lifting to meet hers again. Up close, the lines etched into his face spoke of burdens heavier than the furs he wore. Scars faint along his temple, a jaw clenched against pains both seen and unseen. "Why?" he asked, his voice a low rumble that cut through the hush, laced with the gravel of distrust. Not accusation, but genuine bewilderment, as if kindness were a foreign tongue in these forsaken woods. Mireia drew her knees to her chest, the cold seeping into her bones like an old grief resurfacing. Fear coiled in her gut, instinctive and sharp. Alphas did not yield to omegas without claim or conquest. Yet curiosity flickered brighter, drawing her gaze to the way his breath steadied with the nourishment, the subtle shift in his posture from collapse to quiet vigilance. "Because the cold doesn't discriminate," she replied, her words soft but unyielding, carried on the exhale of frost. "It takes the strong as readily as the weak. I've walked too long alone to watch another fall without reaching out." He studied her then, truly, his nostrils flaring subtly as her scent wrapped around him once more. Heather blooming defiant through frost, a purity that pierced the veil of his self-imposed exile. Valor had wandered these borders incognito, fleeing the Iron Throne where his decrees had ignited wars he now cursed in the dead of night. The bond stirred again, not as a blaze of possession, but a reverent pull, like the moon calling tide from distant seas. He had resisted such fates his entire reign, binding duty over destiny, guilt over grace. This Omega, with her scarred throat and steady hands, unraveled that resolve thread by thread. But he pushed it down, rationalizing it as the delirium of blood loss, the isolation playing tricks on a king's weary mind. Rising slowly, he tested his wound, pressing a hand to the gash beneath his cloak. The fabric was dark with seepage, but the bread had steadied him enough to stand. "You risk much for a stranger," he said, extending a hand not in demand but offer, his palm calloused and warm against the chill. Mireia hesitated, her pulse thundering like distant drums, the touch from moments ago still lingering, a spark that hummed in her veins, forbidden and familiar all at once. She placed her hand in his, allowing him to pull her up, the contact brief yet electric, sending a shiver through her that had nothing to do with the snow. They moved together without words, an instinctive tandem born of survival's necessity. The ravine narrowed ahead, its walls rising like the jaws of some ancient beast, and as they pressed on, the wind carried a new sound, not the mournful howl of wolves, but the deliberate crunch of boots on snow, multiple and closing. Vailor's body tensed beside her, his free hand drifting to the hilt of a concealed dagger, eyes scanning the whitening haze. Mireia's breath caught. She knew that rhythm, the patrol cadence of border guards, hunters from packs who claim these lands as their own. Her own exile had painted her a ghost here, but with him she became a target anew. "Hide," he murmured, urgency threading his tone like steel through silk, guiding her toward a cleft in the rock face, a shallow cave veiled by overhanging ice. She slipped inside first, the darkness cool and close, smelling of damp stone and forgotten earth. He followed, his broader frame blocking the entrance, a living shield as shadows detached from the tree line. 3 figures, cloaked and armed, their scents sharp with aggression and the metallic tang of allegiance to rival clans. Mireia pressed against the rough wall, her heart a wild drum in the confined space, close enough to feel the heat radiating from his body. Fear warred with an emerging trust, her instinct screaming to flee while something deeper rooted her in place. He was no mere wanderer. The way he positioned himself, silent and lethal, spoke of battles etched into muscle memory. The patrols drew nearer, voices low and guttural, debating tracks in the snow. Their tracks, blurred but betraying. In the dimness, Vailor's gaze found hers, a silent vow passing between them. Not conquest, but alliance against the encroaching night. Empathy bloomed in that shared breath, her curiosity yielding to a tentative bond, fragile as the ice above. She reached out, her fingers brushing his arm, not in plea but solidarity, and he stilled, the touch igniting that reverent pull anew. What was strength, if not choosing to stand with another in the storm's maw? Mercy over isolation. The patrols lingered, their lanterns casting erratic shadows that danced like specters on the cave walls, the wind howling as if the moon itself urged them onward. Minutes stretched into eternity, the air thick with tension and the unspoken weight of fates intertwining. When the footsteps finally receded, swallowed by the blizzard's roar, Vailor exhaled, turning to her with eyes softened by the ordeal. "They seek more than wanderers," he said quietly, the first crack in his guarded facade. "Wars bleed into these woods." Mireia nodded, the cave's chill now a cocoon rather than a cage, their proximity weaving empathy into something profound, a bond resisted yet undeniable, born of fear's forge and curiosity's flame. Outside, the snow buried their trail, but within, the seeds of refuge took root under the moon's watchful silver eye. And now, I invite you to leave a trace of your presence in the comments. Tell us where in the world you're watching from and the exact hour you hear this story. We wish to know how far these northern confessions travel, and at what moments of the night they find you. The cave's embrace lingered like a reluctant lover, its stone walls exhaling the faint, mineral tang of ages buried deep as Mireia shifted against the unyielding chill. The patrol's echoes had faded into the blizzard's symphony, leaving only the rhythmic drip of melting ice and the shared cadence of their breaths, hers quickened by the proximity, his steady as the ancient pines outside. She drew her cloak tighter, the fabric rough against her skin, a barrier against the vulnerability that bloomed in this shadowed intimacy. Fear still coiled in her chest, not for the intruders who had passed, but for the man beside her, whose presence felt like a storm held in check, his warmth a counterpoint to the frost that clawed at her resolve. Vylor's silhouette filled the narrow space, his broad shoulders a bulwark against the wind's probing fingers that whistled through the cleft above. He did not crowd her, yet the air between them hummed with unspoken currents, her heather scent mingling with his pine and iron aura, weaving threads neither dared to name. Mireia's gaze traced the faint scars on his knuckles, illuminated by a sliver of moonlight piercing the veil, wondering at the hands that had wielded more than daggers, perhaps swords that carved empires from bloodied snow. Wars, she echoed softly, the word tasting of ash on her tongue, stirring memories of her pack's border skirmishes, where Omegas like her mended the fallen only to be overlooked in the victors' tales. They leave no corner untouched. What draws you into their shadow? He turned his head slightly, the movement deliberate, his storm-gray eyes catching the lunar gleam like polished steel. Guilt flickered there, a shadow deeper than the cave's gloom, born of decrees he had issued from thrones far removed from this exile's hush. Valor had ordered the ironclad legions to march against the eastern clans, a war fueled by alliances fraying like old rope, now haunting him as vividly as the gash at his side. Revealing his identity would shatter this fragile refuge, bind her to a king she pitied rather than revered. Instead, he chose half-truths, his voice a low murmur that resonated against the stone. A fool's pride, commands given in firelight, regretted in the cold. Now the land turns on its maker. Empathy stirred in Mireia, unbidden and warm, piercing the armor of her isolation. She had known rejection's sting, the pack's verdict a blade that severed without mercy, leaving her to wander these frozen veins alone. Yet here was an alpha who spoke not of conquest, but remorse, his melancholy a mirror to her own quiet despair. Her hand, acting on instinct, reached toward his wound, fingers hovering near the darkened fabric. "Let me see," she said, not a command, but an offer, her voice threaded with the compassion that had marked her as weak in the eyes of her former kin. The moon's light slanted lower, bathing his face in silver, highlighting the tension in his jaw as he considered her. This Omega who had shared her last bread without demand, her touch a sacrament he had forsaken in his pursuit of duty. He relented, shrugging back the cloak with a wince, exposing the laceration. A jagged tear from brambles or blade, edges inflamed against his tanned skin. Blood had crusted, but infection's whisper lingered in the heat radiating from it. Mireia tore a strip from her cloak's hem, the fabric yielding with a soft rip that echoed like a vow, and pressed it gently to staunch the flow. Her fingers brushed his flesh, sending a jolt through her, a spark of connection, not desire's fire, but something reverent, as if the goddess herself traced paths through their veins. Valor's breath hitched, not from pain, but the bond's insistent pull, her scent enveloping him like a benediction, awakening the fated link he had long denied. Reverence, not possession, flooded him. She was no prize to claim, but a revelation. Her mercy, the antidote to his guilt-ridden throne. As she worked, the storm outside raged fiercer, snow piling against the entrance in drifts that sealed them deeper into refuge. Uivos pierced the gale, distant and mournful, as if the wild called to the wild within them. Mireia's mind raced with dilemmas. To aid him was to entangle her fragile freedom, yet turning away felt like betraying the Pathfinder's gift she had always doubted, a hidden sight that guided the lost, manifesting now in this shared shelter. This wound, it festers from more than steel, she murmured, tying the bandage with steady hands, her eyes meeting his. The air grew thick, charged with the scent of blood and heather. The cave a womb of stone where empathy forged into bond, tentative and profound. Violor captured her wrist lightly as she withdrew, not to hold, but to still the tremor he sensed in her. "You bind more than flesh," he said, his tone laced with a vulnerability that cracked his stoic facade, the king's melancholy surfacing like blood through snow. "In my world, such kindness is a weapon turned inward." He released her, but the touch lingered, a bridge across the chasm of their exiles. Mireia pulled back, her heart pounding with the weight of it. The pull toward him, resisted by the scars of her past, rationalized as survival's illusion. Yet in that moment, as the wind howled like a chorus of fates, she felt the bond take root, empathy blooming into something unbreakable, a choice between solitude's mercy and connection's risk. Dawn crept in grudgingly, the blizzard easing to reveal a world reborn in white, the cave's mouth framed by icicles like frozen tears. They emerged together, Valor's step steadier, his gaze lingering on her with a protectiveness he masked as alliance. As they crested the ravine, moving toward the shadowed foothills where ancient caverns promised deeper shelter, a new threat stirred. The faint glint of armor on the horizon, rival scouts drawn by the storm's tails. Violor tensed, drawing her behind a boulder cluster, his body shielding hers instinctively. Mireia's breath caught, fear mingling with trust. In his shadow, she glimpsed not subjugation, but equality forged in peril, a bond that demanded they protect one another or perish divided. The scouts passed perilously close, their boots crunching like judgments on the crust, voices murmuring of a rogue alpha and his omega quarry, whispers of war's tendrils reaching into the wilds. Mireia pressed against him, her hand finding his in the silence, the touch a silent oath. When the danger faded, Valor led her onward, his mind already weaving plans to shield her, supplies left in secret caches, protections invoked without revelation. But as the moon waned above, casting long shadows over the snow, Mireia wondered, was this refuge a salvation, or the prelude to a throne's inescapable claim? Strength lay not in claws, but in choosing vulnerability, mercy as the true crown. Yet the dilemma gnawed. What freedom remained when fate bound two broken souls under one silver gaze? The foothills rose like the spine of some slumbering beast, their slopes etched with veins of ice that gleamed under the moon's reluctant gaze, as if the night itself mourned the secrets stirring below. Mireia's boots sank into the softening snow, each step a labored pull against the weight of uncertainty that clung to her like frost. The scout's passage had left an acrid aftertaste in the air, sweat and steel mingled with the pine-sharp edge of her companion's vigilance. Violor walked a pace ahead, his form a shadowed sentinel, scanning the tree line with eyes that held the storm's quiet fury. She felt the bond between them now, not as chains, but as an undercurrent, warm and insistent, threading through her veins like the heather roots she once tended in forgotten meadows. Yet doubt gnawed at her edges, his protections, whispered in the cave's hush, caches of dried meat and furs he claimed to have scavenged, felt too precise, too timely, as if he anticipated her needs before she voiced them. Was this alliance, or the subtle weave of a king's web? They crested a ridge where the wind fell still, revealing a hidden vale cradled between granite outcrops, its floor dusted with snow that swirled in lazy eddies. Ancient standing stones ringed the perimeter, their surfaces carved with lunar runes faded by centuries of tempests, symbols of the goddess's pathfinders, those rare omegas whose blood sang of hidden trails, guiding the worthy through veils of fate. Mireia paused, her breath catching as a familiar ache bloomed at her throat, the crescent scar pulsing like a second heartbeat. She had dismissed it always as a mark of weakness, a flaw that doomed her to exile. But here, under the moon's full swell, it warmed, drawing her gaze to a narrow crevice veiled by overhanging vines heavy with rime. "Something calls," she murmured, more to herself than to him, her voice a fragile thread in the hush. Valor turned, his brow furrowing, the guilt that shadowed his features deepening into concern. He had begun to sense it too, the way her presence steadied the chaos in his soul, her scent a balm against the war's crimson echoes that haunted his dreams. In the nights since their meeting, he had slipped away under cover of darkness, leaving provisions at the edges of their path. A water skin filled from a pure spring, a cloak lined with wolf's wool to ward the chill. Not to possess, but to honor the reverence she awakened. A bond that promised redemption from the throne's bloodied scepter. Yet enemies circled closer. Whispers from his spies spoke of rival alphas scenting his absence, plotting to seize the ironclad crown amid the fraying alliances he had once forged. Mireia stepped forward, compelled by an inner sight unfurling like petals in moonlight. The world sharpened, not with claws or fury, but clarity, a vision overlaying the mundane, revealing threads of destiny woven into the snow. The crevice was no mere fissure. It parted into a subterranean passage, its walls aglow with phosphorescent fungi that traced a safe descent, bypassing the avalanche-prone slopes beyond. Her gift, long dormant, stirred now, born of the bond's quiet insistence, the goddess's whisper through her veins. She saw not just stone, but paths, one leading to peril, where rival packs ambushed under false flags, another to sanctuary, a forgotten temple where ancient rites could mend more than flesh. "It's here," she said, her hand extending toward the veil, fingers trembling as the scar burned brighter, casting a faint silver light that danced across the ice. Vialor approached, his nostrils flaring at the shift in her scent, now laced with ozone and wild bloom, electric with power. He had sought such a sign his entire reign, a key to unravel the wars he had ignited, where duty's blade cut deeper than any foe's. Legend spoke of the Pathfinder Omega, one whose sight pierced illusions of power, revealing truths that toppled tyrants and healed fractured realms. As her light bloomed, illuminating runes that matched those on his concealed royal amulet, a wolf's head wreathed in thorns, he felt the revelation crash over him like a tidal wave. She was no fragile exile. She was the fulcrum, the one whose mercy could guide him from guilt's abyss, redeeming the blood on his hands not through conquest, but choice. "You see it," he breathed, awe threading his voice, roughened by the weight of realization. His hand covered hers at the crevice's edge, not to claim but to steady, the contact sending reverence surging through him anew. Mireia met his gaze, her eyes wide with the gift's dawning force, visions of his past flickering unbidden, thrones stained red, orders that birthed orphans in the snow, a king's solitude forged in pride's fire. She recoiled slightly, the intimacy of it overwhelming, her heart pounding with the dilemma it unleashed. This power, once her shame, now bound her to his fate. To embrace it meant stepping from exile's shadow into destiny's glare, where love demanded equality, not crowns. They entered the passage together, the air growing warmer, laced with the scent of earth and distant water, the walls echoing their footsteps like a sacred drum. Torchlight was unnecessary. Her scar's glow led them, revealing murals of ancient unions, alphas and omegas entwined under lunar arcs, symbols of bonds that bent wars to peace. Valor's mind raced. She was the key, her Pathfinder's sight, the revelation that could expose the traitors in his court, the rival who poisoned alliances for the throne. But to voice it would shatter their fragile equality, demand she yield to his world. Instead, He walked beside her, his melancholy yielding to hope's fragile spark, the bond deepening into something profound, a reverence that promised not possession, but partnership in redemption. As they emerged into the temple's heart, a vast chamber where a frozen pool mirrored the moon above, its surface etched with blood-red veins of quartz, Mireya's vision crested. She saw the wars turning, a betrayal in the ironclad halls, a blade aimed at his heart, and her hand guiding him through the storm to forgiveness. The scar faded, leaving her breathless, the weight of it crashing down. Valor knelt at the pool's edge, dipping his fingers into the icy water, his reflection fracturing like his resolve. "You are the light I sought in darkness," he said softly, turning to her, eyes shimmering with unshed tears. "Not as queen, but as the one who sees truth where I built lies." Mireya's chest tightened, the revelation a double-edged blade, empowering yet ensnaring, her gift manifesting as both salvation and chain. In that chamber, under the moon's piercing eye, the fire of their bond crackled like unseen embers, the wind outside wivando a chorus of choices yet to come. What was destiny, if not the mercy to forge it anew, power yielding to compassion's quiet reign? Subscribe if you believe mercy can crown even the fallen. Comment Luna if you'd walk through the storm for someone who saw your... The temple's frozen pool lay still as a held breath, its quartz veins pulsing faintly with the moon's borrowed light, casting fractured reflections that danced like ghosts across the chamber walls. Mireya stood transfixed, the weight of her revelation settling into her bones like the first heavy snow of winter, cold and unyielding. The crescent scar at her throat throbbed with a residual warmth, a beacon that had unveiled not just hidden paths, but the shadowed corridors of Valor's soul. Visions of thrones slick with the blood of innocence, alliances forged in deceit, a king's commands that echoed like thunder across the realms. She pressed a hand to her chest, feeling the rapid flutter beneath, as if her heart sought escape from the truths it now harbored. This gift, once dismissed as frailty, had stripped away illusions, binding her to him in ways that transcended scent and touch. Reverence had bloomed in his eyes, but for her, it stirred a tempest. Was this power a crown or a cage, demanding she navigate his wars when her own exile still bled fresh? Valor rose from the pool's edge, water dripping from his fingers like unshed remorse, his storm-gray gaze locking onto hers with an intensity that pierced the dimness. The air hummed with the bond's insistence, her heather scent now laced with the ozone of awakening magic, mingling with his pine and iron aura to form something sacred, volatile. He stepped closer, not in dominance, but deference, his voice a gravel murmur that resonated against the stone. "The paths you see, they lead beyond this chamber, to the heart of what I've wrought." Guilt etched deeper lines into his face, the melancholy of a ruler who had bartered mercy for might, now glimpsing redemption in an Omega's unclaimed grace. Yet he held back, rationalizing the pull as duty's echo, not fate's demand, afraid that voicing his identity would taint the equality they had forged in snow and silence. Outside, the wind shifted, carrying the distant clamor of pursuit, the sharp crack of branches under boot, the low growl of voices honed by vendetta. Mireya's scar flared anew, her vision sharpening to reveal the encroaching threat, not mere scouts, but a vanguard from the eastern clans, led by Thorn, the rival alpha whose ambition had poisoned Valor's court. Thorn, with his coal-black fur and eyes like forged obsidian, had whispered treasons into the ears of wavering lords, turning the king's war into a bid for the ironclad throne. They came now, drawn by rumors of a rogue wanderer whose scent matched the vanished monarchs, their lanterns bobbing like malevolent stars through the Vale's veil. "We cannot linger," Valor said, his hand finding hers in the gloom, the contact a steady anchor amid the rising dread. His touch ignited no fire of possession, only the reverent warmth of alliance. Yet Mireia hesitated, her mind fracturing under the moral rift. To follow him meant confronting not just enemies, but the pack's ghosts, her former alpha, who had cast her out for Thorn's whispered alliances, deeming her too soft for the power plays that now bled the land. Freedom whispered of retreat, vanishing into the wilds where her gift could guide only herself. But love, resisted as illusion, tugged insistent, a redemption that asked her to forgive the hierarchies that had broken her, to choose compassion over the war they both carried in their scars. They fled the temple through a rear fissure her sight unveiled, the passage twisting like veins through the mountain's heart, walls slick with condensation that wept icy tears onto their shoulders. The air grew thick with the scent of damp earth and distant fire, torches perhaps, or the blaze of conflict igniting above. Mireia's breaths came ragged, her cloak snagging on jagged protrusions, each tear a reminder of the fragility she refused to let shatter. Behind them, the clamor swelled. Thorn's pack, a dozen strong, their howls slicing the night like accusations, weavos that mourned the betrayals they embodied. Valor's pace quickened, his wound pulling taut beneath the bandage she had tied, but he shielded her from the rear, his body a barrier against the shadows nipping at their heels. The passage spat them into a narrow gorge, moonlight spilling over lips of frost like spilled silver, illuminating the confrontation that fate had ordained. Thorn emerged from the tree line first, his form massive and unyielding, flanked by her former packmates, faces she knew from fireside gatherings, now twisted by loyalty's cruel forge. Her old alpha, Garrick, stood at Thorn's side, his gaze sliding over her with indifference laced in regret, the mate he had chosen absent, bartered for promises of rank in this rival's rise. "The exile returns," Thorn snarled, his voice a thunderclap that echoed off the ice, eyes gleaming with the hunger of one who scented weakness as opportunity. "And with the ghost of a king. Vailor, your wars have whetted appetites you cannot sate." Valor's stance shifted, drawing a concealed blade that caught the lunar gleam, its edge whispering of battles past. The revelation hung unspoken between them. Mireia knew his name now, the weight of it crashing like an avalanche, confirming the visions that had pierced her soul. He glanced at her, a silent plea in his eyes, not for fealty, but choice. The bond thrummed, urging her forward, her scar igniting to reveal the gorge's hidden peril, a chasm veiled by snow where one false step meant oblivion. "She is no prize," Valor declared, his tone steady with the ethics that had eroded his throne, melancholy yielding to resolve. "Her mercy outshines your crowns of bone." Mireia stepped to his side, heart pounding with the visceral roar of blood in her ears, the wind whipping her hair like a banner of defiance. The pack advanced, Garrick's scent, once familiar, now sour with shame, washing over her, stirring the raw ache of rejection. "You cast me out for this?" she called, her voice cutting through the tension, laced with the philosophy that had sustained her exile. "Power that devours its own?" Thorn laughed, a guttural sound that chilled deeper than frost, lunging forward with claws extended, his betas fanning out to encircle. The clash erupted in a blur of motion. Valor's blade met Thorn's fury, steel singing against fang, blood spraying dark against the snow like accusations painted in crimson. Mireia dodged a swipe from Garrick, her gift surging instinctive, a path unveiled through the melee, guiding her to a fallen lantern that she kicked toward a drift, igniting a wall of flame that halted the advance. Heat bloomed visceral, singeing the air with the acrid bite of burning pine, shadows leaping like specters under the moon's gaze. Pain lanced her arm from a glancing claw, warm blood trickling, but she pressed on, her introspections crystallizing into action. Strength was not in vengeance, but choosing forgiveness amid the storm, love as the bridge over war's abyss. Thorn pinned Valor against a boulder, the king's blade skittering away, guilt flashing in his eyes as the past converged. The traitor he had overlooked, the rival he had empowered through neglect. Mireya's vision pierced the fray. A choice laid bare, her hand extended not in submission, but equality, offering a path to retreat that spared blood for blood. "Enough!" she commanded, her voice a clarion amid the chaos, scar blazing silver. Thorn faltered, scenting the power in her, but Garrick lunged anew, his strike aimed at her throat. Vylor surged, tackling Garrick into the snow, the impact a dull thud that silenced the gorge. Blood bloomed on the white, not hers, but the traitor's. Garrick gasping, eyes wide with the realization of his fall. Thorn retreated a step, assessing, his ambition warring with the supernatural chill of her gaze. "She sees your lies," Valor rasped, rising bloodied but unbroken, positioning himself between her and the fray. The pack hesitated, the fire's roar mingling with distant weavos, the moon bearing witness to the moral precipice. Mireya trembled, the dilemma ethical and raw. Forgive the past that scarred her, embrace a love demanding vulnerability over thrones, or flee into freedom's solitary wilds, leaving war to consume itself. Her hand found Vylor's, slick with blood yet firm, the bond a lifeline in the visceral storm. As Thorn snarled a retreat, vanishing into the shadows with his wounded, the gorge fell silent, save for the crackle of dying flames and their labored breaths. Under the moon's unyielding eye, she faced him, heart torn between liberty's call and redemption's embrace. What was true power, if not the mercy to heal what power had rent asunder? The choice loomed, a blade suspended, as snow began to fall once more, veiling the bloodied snow in fragile absolution. The gorgeous silence hung heavy, broken only by the sizzle of embers dying in the snow, their faint glow casting elongated shadows that clawed at the frost like desperate fingers. Mireya's arm throbbed where Garrick's claw had grazed her, the wound a shallow furrow leaking warmth into the chill, each drop staining the white expanse crimson, a visceral reminder that mercy's price was etched in flesh. She knelt beside Valor, her hands trembling as she tore another strip from her tattered cloak, pressing it to his split lip where Thorn's blow had landed true. Blood smeared her fingers, metallic and hot, mingling with the earthy residue of the fight. The air thick with the acrid bite of scorched pine and the lingering musk of fear sweat from the retreating pack. The moon loomed above, bloated and indifferent, its silver light pooling in the chasm's depths like spilled mercury, illuminating the bodies. Garrick's still form twisted in the drift, eyes vacant, a traitor felled not by vengeance, but the inexorable turn of choices made in shadow. Valor's breath rasped against her palm as she worked, his storm-gray eyes half-lidded, reflecting the lunar gleam with a weariness that pierced deeper than any blade. Guilt radiated from him like heat from a banked fire, the king's melancholy surfacing raw in the aftermath, his broad frame slumped against the boulder that had witnessed his near fall. He had fought not for glory, but to shield her, to honor the reverence she had awakened, a bond that demanded equality amid the hierarchies he had once upheld. Yet now, as the wind whispered through the gorge, carrying distant uivos that mourned the spilled blood, Mireya felt the weight of revelation crash fully upon her. His identity, unveiled in the fray, was no longer a secret, but a chain. Alpha King Valor, architect of wars that had orphaned packs and scarred the realms, the very power that had enabled her exile through alliances twisted by ambition like thorns. Her scar pulsed faintly, an echo of the Pathfinder's sight, showing her not just the path ahead, but the fractures in his soul, decrees born of pride, regrets that festered like untreated wounds. "Why shield me?" she whispered, her voice a fragile thread woven through the hush, tying the bandage with fingers slick from their shared crimson. The question hung between them, laced with the philosophy that had sustained her through exile. Strength lay not in thrones or claws, but in the mercy to confront what power had wrought. Vylor's hand rose, hovering near her cheek, not to claim but to trace the air as if afraid his touch might taint her. Reverence burned in his gaze, the bond thrumming like a distant drum, resisted no longer by rationalization, but by the ethical precipice they balanced upon. "Because in you, I see what I've lost," he murmured, his tone gravel rough, etched with the ethics of a ruler who had bartered compassion for duty. "Your gift pierces the lies I built my crown upon, not as possession, but as the truth I must earn." The wind rose then, a keening wail that tugged at her hair, carrying the faint scent of approaching torches. Thorn's remnants regrouping, or perhaps Valor's own loyalists, drawn by the chaos echoing through the wilds. Mireia rose, pulling him with her, their hands clasping in a grip born of necessity, slick with blood, yet unyielding. They moved through the gorge's narrowing throat, her scar guiding them toward a ledge veiled by icicles, the Pathfinder's vision unfolding like frost lace, a traverse above the chasm where moonlight revealed handholds etched by ancient rains, bypassing the bloodied floor below. But as they climbed, the stone cold and unmerciful under her palms, introspection clawed at her, Garrick's death replayed in flashes, his final gasp a mirror to her own rejection. The pack's verdict that had deemed her unworthy now echoing in this greater betrayal. Thorn's ambition had woven through her old life, bartering her for alliances that fueled Valor's wars. Forgiving it meant embracing a love forged in those fires, demanding he dismantle the power that had broken her, even if it cost him the ironclad throne. Halfway across, the ledge trembled, a subtle shift, snow avalanching from above in a roar that drowned the weavos, forcing them to press flat against the rock. Vylor's body covered hers instinctively, his warmth a shield against the cascade. Debris pattering like judgments from the moon's court. In that suspended breath, heartbeats sinking amid the chaos, Mireia felt the bond crest visceral. Not desire's blaze, but redemption's quiet forge, her heather scent enveloping him like a vow, his pine and iron aura grounding her doubt. "I cannot be your queen of mercy," she said, words muffled against his shoulder. The wind howling as if the goddess herself urged confession. "Not if it chains me to the wars you regret. Equality, Valor, or nothing. Let the crown shatter if it must." He pulled back slightly, eyes searching hers in the lunar half-light, guilt yielding to a profound resolve, the melancholy of his reign cracking like ice under spring's thaw. "Then we choose together," he replied, voice steady despite the wound's pull, the ethics of his soul aligning with her demand. "No throne without your light to guide it true. Sacrifice the power that divided us for the union that heals." The avalanche subsided, leaving silence broken only by their breaths, the path ahead clear under her scar's faint glow, a descent into a hidden glade where ancient oaks stood sentinel, their branches heavy with rime, a sanctuary whispering of renascimento. They reached the glade as dawn bled pale across the horizon, the moon fading like a relinquished scepter. Vylor knelt before a weathered altar stone, its surface carved with lunar wolves in eternal chase, drawing a concealed vial from his cloak, royal blood sealed against betrayal. He offered it to her, not as king, but equal, the gesture a moral crossroads. Mingle it with hers in the rite of true bond, dissolving the hierarchies that had scarred them, or walk away, her freedom intact amid the wilds. Mireia's hand hovered, the scar burning with visions of futures intertwined, realms healed by compassion's rain, wars ended not by blade, but forgiveness, a love accepted as proof of their shared rebirth. Blood dripped from her arm onto the stone, mingling with his as she clasped the vial, the union sealing in a rush of warmth that chased the cold from her veins. Yet, as the rite completed, distant horns blared. Thorn's final gambit, legions marching to claim the gorge's spoils, the past converging one last time. Valor rose, blade in hand, but turned to her with eyes alight. Together, We end it, not as ruler and exile, but as one. Mireia nodded, the Pathfinder's sight unveiling the glade's hidden exit, a tunnel to the heart of the fray. The dilemma resolved in that heartbeat. Love as redemption demanded sacrifice, power yielding to compassion's crown, equality, the true rebirth. Under the waning moon, fire kindled in their souls, the wind carrying their oath forward, into the storm, where mercy would crown the fallen or claim them eternal. The glade trembled with the earth's response, blood and snow witnesses to the choice that bound fates anew, the first light of dawn gilding the path to union's visceral embrace. The glade's ancient oaks stood as silent vows, their branches laced with rhyme that caught the dawn's hesitant light, turning the world into a tapestry of silver and gold. Mireia's veins thrummed with the rite's echo, the mingled blood on the altar stone now frozen in crimson filigree, a symbol of the union she had forged, not in submission, but in the raw equality that demanded everything and nothing less. Her arm's wound had staunched, the Pathfinder's scar at her throat, a quiet ember, no longer burning but warm, as if the goddess had exhaled approval into her soul. Yet the horn's blare shattered the hush, a brazen call rolling through the foothills like thunder's harbinger, Thorn's legions converging on the gorge above, their drums pulsing with the heartbeat of unyielding ambition. The air grew heavy with the scent of oiled leather and sharpened steel, carried on a wind that whipped the snow into stinging veils, weavos rising from the ranks like a dirge for the fallen hierarchies. Vylor's hand tightened in hers, calloused and steady, his storm-gray eyes meeting the horizon where shadows massed against the paling sky. Blood streaked his face from the gorge's fray, a map of sacrifices already made, but his posture held no king's arrogance, only the melancholy resolve of one who had glimpsed redemption's fragile edge. The bond between them hummed visceral, her heather scent weaving through his pine and iron aura like roots claiming stone, a reverence that had evolved from resisted pull to accepted truth. Mireia felt it in her core, a tide that drowned doubt. Love was no reward, but proof, demanding she choose not freedom's solitary wilds, but the cure of shared rebirth, even as it asked her to confront the power that had exiled her. "They come for the throne," he said, voice low and gravel-edged, laced with the ethics that had eroded his reign. "But we end it here, not with blades alone, but the mercy they've forgotten." She nodded, the wind tugging at her cloak like insistent fingers, the cold biting into her skin with the sharpness of finality. Introspection flooded her as they moved toward the tunnel's mouth, a yawning fissure veiled by frost-veined vines. Garrick's vacant eyes replayed in flashes, his death a mirror to her rejection, the pack's verdict now transcended by this greater trial. Thorn's betrayal had threaded through her past, bartering her worth for alliances that fueled Valor's wars, yet forgiving it meant dismantling those very structures, sacrificing the crown's illusion for compassion's quiet reign. Her gift surged anew, the scar's warmth unveiling the path, not a retreat, but a confrontation in the gorge's heart, where hidden ledges and fire traps could turn the tide without wholesale slaughter. Faith warred with despair in her chest, the moon's waning gaze a spiritual anchor, whispering that destiny bowed to liberty's choice. They descended into the tunnel's embrace, the earth muffling the horns to a distant roar, walls slick with condensation that dripped like tears onto their shoulders. Torchlight was unneeded. Her vision pierced the gloom, revealing runes that glowed faintly, ancient wards against tyranny's flood. Valor's breath synced with hers, the proximity a tactile comfort amid the stone's chill, his free hand brushing her arm in silent solidarity. No possession, but partnership forged in blood and snow. "If we fall," he murmured, the words heavy with guilt's residue, "know it was for this, for the equality you demanded." Mireia's heart clenched, the philosophy crystallizing. What was strength, if not choosing mercy over the throne's devouring maw, power yielding to the healer's touch? The tunnel spat them into the gorge's shadowed underbelly, emerging behind a curtain of icicles that shattered like brittle vows under their passage. Above, Thorn's forces poured in, a tide of fur-clad warriors and snarling betas, their banners snapping in the gale, black wolves on fields of red, symbols of the ambition that had poisoned courts and packs alike. Thorn himself stood at the vanguard, massive and unbowed, his obsidian eyes scanning the bloodied snow where Garrick lay, a sneer twisting his muzzle. The king cowers with his stray. He bellowed, voice echoing off the ice like a judgment, his pack fanning out with blades drawn, the metallic tang sharp in the air. Fires kindled in their midst, torches flaring orange against the dawn, casting visceral shadows that leaped like demons under the moon's final vigil. Mireia stepped forward, Valor at her side, their hands parting only to draw weapons, his a reclaimed sword from the glade's cache, hers a shard of quartz from the temple, empowered by her scar's light. The legions halted, scents clashing in a storm of aggression and confusion, the wind howling as if the wild itself bore witness. Her vision unfolded the gorge's secrets. Avalanches poised on the rims, fire pits veiled by snow, paths that could isolate Thorn from his horde. "You built your power on lies," she called, her voice steady despite the tremor in her limbs, carrying the weight of her rebirth. "Thrones stained with the blood of the Forsaken. We offer not war, but choice. Lay down your blades, or let mercy claim what ambition devours." Thorn laughed, a guttural thunder that chilled deeper than frost, lunging with claws extended, his betas surging like a wave. The clash ignited in sensory fury. Steel rang against fang, blood sprayed hot and coppery across the snow, Weavos piercing the gale as bodies tumbled into the chasm's maw. Vylor met Thorn head-on, their forms a blur of muscle and malice, the king's blade carving arcs of silver under the dawn. Mireia wove through the fray, her gift a guiding flame, kicking a torch into a drift to birth a wall of fire, its roar drowning screams, heat blistering her skin as she unveiled a ledge for the loyalists who emerged from hidden crevices, Valor's hidden guards drawn by the horns. Pain lanced her side from a glancing blow, warm blood soaking her side, but she pressed on, the bond with Valor a visceral tether, his roars fueling her resolve. Thorn pinned Valor against the gorge wall, claws raking deep furrows, the king's blood blooming dark against the stone. Guilt flashed in Valor's eyes, the wars he had ordered now converging in this mortal press. But Mireia's cry cut through. "Enough!" Her scar blazed, vision revealing the avalanche's trigger, a single boulder teetering above. She hurled the quartz shard, shattering ice that unleashed the cascade, a roar of snow and stone thundering down, burying Thorn's vanguard in white oblivion, the rival Alpha staggering back, half crushed under the deluge. His howl broke, ambition's fire guttering in the cold, as survivors fled into the wind's embrace, the gorge falling silent save for the settling drifts and labored breaths. Vylor slumped against her, wounds weeping, but alive, his hand finding hers amid the crimson-streaked snow. The dawn crested fully, gilding the ruins in golden absolution, the moon a fading specter. Mireia knelt with him, binding his gashes with the last of her cloak, tears tracing salt paths down her cheeks, not of despair, but release. The choice had been made. Sacrifice the throne's isolation for union's cure, power humbled by compassion's rebirth. Thorn's broken form stirred faintly, spared by the snow's mercy, a living testament to forgiveness over slaughter. "We rebuild," Valor whispered, reverence in his gaze, the bond sealing their fates in equality's forge. "Not as king and omega, but as one, your light my crown." The wind softened to a sigh, carrying the scent of fresh snow and healing earth, Weavos distant now, a chorus of renewal. Mireia leaned into him, the Pathfinder's scar cooling to a peaceful glow, her exile transmuted into destiny's embrace. Under the sky's awakening eye, love proved its redemptive arc, not reward, but the profound choice that birthed realms anew, blood and fire yielding to the quiet reign of mercy's flame. If your heart beat alongside ours, like, comment, and subscribe. Because every soul that joins our moon keeps the flame of redemption alive.